This is Fire in the Hole with Nathan Lawrence. This message is entitled The Menorah and the Blaspheming Son, How the Church is Aborting Its Young. Shalom everyone, once again. Onward and upward as we explore the Torah, the Word of Elohim, in light of the gospel message. We are in Parashah Emor, which is Leviticus 21 through 24. And we are going to focus on an overview of Leviticus 24 today, where we have three seemingly unrelated subjects. But when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, we see an amazing picture form, and they are not separate topics, but they all relate to each other in a wonderful Hebraic fashion, and we're going to talk about that. Now, before we do that, one of the last video teachings that I made, I think it was last week, I made perhaps the very, very surprising to some people assertion that the reason we are seeing so much rise in transgenderism and dysphoria in the world, and especially in the U.S. and Western so-called Christian nations, is because of the weak, effeminate, feckless, pansy pastors in the pulpits of our churches across our lands. I made the assertion that because the pastors, many of them have been Jezebelized and turned into spiritual Ahabs by a whore system that the Bible calls the whore of Babylon. And I'm talking about the Christian church system going back to the Catholic Church and before, that divorced itself from its apostolic roots. You can go read about it in the writings of the early church fathers, which I have up here in my library in 10 volumes. And these many pastors, and I'm not the only one that's identified this problem. Francis Schaeffer talked about this. A.W. Tozer, talked about this, and others have warned us back, a few decades ago, that many of the pastors are compromised because of love of money, the praises of men, and love of riches and acclaim, and some have even succumbed to sexual perversions. And so the church has become weak, flabby, and the pastors, many of them look effeminate. Many of them are very weak. It's very sad. They're not real men of God. And so they are not putting out a model of true spiritual masculinity. So how can I say that the transgender movement, which we never heard of a few decades ago, a few years ago, that would have been unthinkable, that men and women, boys and girls, children even, would be cutting off their genitals and be all confused about their gender and taking drugs to try to, and surgeries. You would have said no. Dr. Mengele in the Nazi prison camps, okay, maybe. He didn't even do that. And to have political leaders and major influencers in society proclaiming this, and those that are opposed to it are deemed as radical and off base and are haters and are crazy. Everything's been turned upside down. But I trace the roots of this back to the Christian church. Why? What is my biblical basis for this? Because as goes the church, so goes the nation. We see this again and again and again in the Bible, back in the Old Testament. When the Israelites went against the laws of Elohim, when they turned away from the truth of the Bible, all kinds of judgments came. The people began to follow the ways of the Canaanites around them. They sacrificed their children. They went into witchcraft, into sexual perversions, into homosexuality. Drought came upon their land. Their nations were overcome. Their nation was overcome by foreigners. They went into slavery. Their wealth and their riches were stolen away from them. And when they repented and came back to Yehovah Elohim, then the blessings returned. Eventually, as you all know, all the Israelites, both the northern and the southern kingdom, they got so far off, away from Yehovah, that they went into captivity. You telling me that the same doesn't happen today? When we, like America, that used to be, to one degree or another, a Christian nation, a Bible-believing nation, I understand that it wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better than it is today. Most people went to church. Most people knew their Bible to one degree or another. You know, I listened to biographies of great men. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, who were not Christians, who did not confess Yeshua, knew their Bibles better than most Christians out there. Same thing with Theodore Roosevelt. He was raised as I believe as a Presbyterian. I just got done listening to his multi-volumed autobiography. He knew the Bible and he quoted the Bible more, in some cases, than many Christian pastors, even while he was president. Same with George Washington, who, I don't know if he was a Christian. He did pray. He had a faith. Whether he had a saving faith or not, I don't know. That's a debatable. He was definitely further along than Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. But even these men culturally had an understanding of the Bible, and they could quote it chapter and verse. And they did, if you read their writings. And I dare say most church Christians who go to church cannot even do that. That's how far we have slid. Now, that's why I can say that transgenderism is a result of the failure of Christian pastors in the pulpit to preach the truth about male and female and to demonstrate what it is to be a godly man, or if you're a woman, to be a godly woman, instead of an effeminate or a dyke if you're a woman, or a masculine lesbian, where you have churches that uphold all of these things, like the United Church of Christ and the Episcopalian and the United Methodists and the liberal Lutherans, the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Churches of America, and churches like this that have given way to promoting homosexuality and many others. The liberal branch of the Presbyterian USA, I think, is one of the branches of the Presbyterian Church, is also very leftist, or very liberal. I don't know about leftist, but they're very liberal and very pro-homosexual. So I want to discuss this situation, and I'm going to make the case that abortion is a result also in this nation. The rise of abortion and the legalization of abortion is a result of the failure of the Christian church. And we're going to discuss this in light of Leviticus 24. And you'll understand why I make this assertion when we get done on this discussion. So in Leviticus 24, we have the menorah, caring for the menorah that was the 7-branch menorah that was in the tabernacle of Moses. Here's kind of my own version of it that I made. And you all are familiar with the menorah. And also the Bible talks about the 12 loaves of bread that were on the Shulchan HaPanaim, the table of the presence, or the table of the face of Yehovah Elohim. There were 12 unleavened breads that represented the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we have the blasphemer, the rebellious son who blasphemed Elohim, and he was stoned to death. And I'm going to explain how this relates to the modern Christian church. So Leviticus 24, though containing seemingly unrelated instructions, in reality, Leviticus chapter 24 is one complete thought, starting with the details on caring for the tabernacle menorah, concluding with the stoning of the blasphemous son. This is yet another example of the Torah teaching us important spiritual lessons using everyday examples of life and juxtaposing them with specific instructions without overtly connecting all the pieces. The connective implications of these several disparate issues, such as caring for the tabernacle's menorah and dealing with the rebellious son, as well as the 12 loaves of bread, are astounding with regard to how parents should raise their children, as we are about to discover. Now, our Western mentality, our Western mindset has been conditioned in our educational system to the teaching method where principles are explicitly connected chronologically like a mathematical equation. An example of this mathematical step logic is, for example, if we put it in mathematical form, is like 2 plus 2 minus 5 plus 5 minus 1 times 2 equals 16. So we can set up a mathematical equation, a simple one like that, and come to, it makes sense. In this case, you do all those things and it adds up to the number 16. This pedagogic or teaching style is referred to as syllogistic or step logic, where one idea or one argument is laid atop another in a linear or progressive manner, building up to a conclusion or to a point that the teacher is trying to make. This is how our educational systems have taught us, and this is what we in the West are used to learning. And it goes back to Greek thinking and Greek teaching styles. By contrast, Western thinking is unaccustomed to Hebraic thinking, or the Hebraic teaching method called block logic, or block logic, where various ideas and concepts are laid out side by side like pieces of the puzzle on a table, leaving the reader to assemble these random pieces to create his own mental picture and his own understanding. This teaching method is more engaging. Instead of leading the student or the disciple along a pre-programmed process, one step at a time, linearly to a desired end, laying all the pieces of the puzzle invites the student or the disciple to engage and to think his way through and to begin to try putting pieces together so that they fit, and then a picture begins to emerge. So it's more engaging and it's more thought-provoking, and it invites the person to engage or to participate in the process. And that, in that manner, the person comes to the conclusion himself, and therefore it's not just inculcated into him, beat into him, but he derives at the conclusion through his own mental engagement. And therefore he owns it, and it becomes part of his own thinking, part of his own heart. I hope that makes sense. Isaiah explained it this way in Isaiah 28. But the word of Yehovah was to them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. So we don't see the Bible as a textbook from Genesis to Revelation where everything is laid out chronologically, theologically, like progressive revelation, like a mathematical equation. But you have to study the whole Bible and put the pieces together. Yes, there is a progression, but it's not all laid out linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to the end. You've got to study and put all the pieces together. And in the process, you gain a broader understanding of the infinite and a broader understanding of the unsearchable, Yehovah Elohim. And you realize that he doesn't exist in our little boxes that we can label and put up on a shelf and put up in a museum and say, okay, this is this theology or that's that theology, and I can write a book about it and make formulas. There really are no formulas in the Bible. It's a multifaceted system that invites people to engage and come up with a multifaceted understanding of the unsearchableness of Yehovah Elohim. The Western mindset is great for putting a man on the moon or for discovering scientific things, but it fails. It utterly fails at trying to understand the spiritual. That's where the Hebraic mindset comes in. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. I hope that gave you a little bit of understanding about Leviticus chapter 24. Because Leviticus chapter 24 is one continuous thought that is separated from the chapters that come before it and the chapter that comes after, Leviticus 23 and Leviticus 25. This is clear because each chapter begins with the phrase, and Yehovah spoke to Moses. Chapter 23 starts with that, and chapter 25 starts with that. But the several things that are mentioned in chapter 24, you do not find. Chapter 24 begins with, and Yehovah spoke to Moses, but all of the thoughts in chapter 24 are connected by the Hebraic conjunction and, A-N-D, which in Hebrew is the word vav. So this is a connective conjunction. And Yehovah said this, and then he said this, and then he said that. And then the end, and then chapter 25, and the word of the Lord came to Yehovah, or came to Moshe, and then it goes into a whole new thought. That's why we know chapter 24 is one continuous thought. So now let's explore this chapter, discover these insights that are examples written for us and for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come, as Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Leviticus 24 is divided into three subsections, which include caring for the menorah, baking and placing the showbread on the table of showbread, and the punishing a young blaspheming son. Each new section, like I said, begins with the Hebrew word vav, meaning and, which expresses a new thought, but each of which is somehow a continuation of the previous thought. So what do these three sections have to do with each other? First, the menorah is a symbolic picture of Yeshua and the redeemed believer. It is also a prophetic picture of Yeshua, who is the tree of life, and to which each redeemed believer is attached and draws his spiritual sustenance through the Spirit of Elohim. The menorah was literally a series of hollow tubes filled with olive oil, not unlike the vascular system of a tree. The menorah, when Yeshua tells us that Yeshua is the vine and the saints are the branches, in John 15, verse 1 and following, this can be likened to the menorah, a picture of Yeshua, who is the saints' tree of life from which we derive our spiritual sustenance and power. Moreover, the gold in the menorah symbolizes pure, godly character of the righteous and righteousness of the saint. A menorah also produces heat and light through its flame. Light represents the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22 through 25, and the heat of the flame symbolizes the power of the gifts of the Spirit. Go read 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Therefore, the flame is a spiritual picture of how the saints are to evangelize the world. Yeshua called the saints in Matthew 5:14 the light of the world, the light on a hill. Well, Yeshua is the light of the world, but he lights our spiritual menorahs. We reflect his light in the world and cast his light in the world. You are salt and light, he said in Matthew 5:14, into the spiritual darkness through the power of the gifts and the fruit of the Spirit. And then the saint boldly reaches out through the he is known, and through the love that he has one for another and the love that he has for others, and then he reaches out to the world through the gifts and the power of the Spirit. The menorah also represents the Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot, or Pentecost, when Yehovah gave the children of Israel his Torah instructions and righteousness on the day of Pentecost back at Mount Sinai, and then later wrote his Torah on their hearts on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, verse 37. Next, we have the showbread in this chapter 24. And the showbread, the 12 loaves, 12 unleavened loaves of bread on the table of showbread, symbolize the saints or redeemed Israel. That is all 12 tribes uniting to bring the bread of life, the word of Elohim, to the world. This bread was covered in frankincense, symbolizing the prayers of the saints, not only praising Yehovah, but interceding for those who are spiritually lost. Revelation 5:8 and Revelation 8, verse 3. Finally, the death of the young blasphemer in Leviticus 24 is what happens. Now, here's the point that I want to make, so listen carefully. It's what happens when parents do not raise their children correctly by teaching them with the truth of Yehovah's Torah when they are young. If parents were to teach this truth to their children when they were young, they'd be laying the right spiritual foundation under the children by being spiritual light to them, or by being a menorah reflecting the light of Yeshua in their homes to their children when they grow up, and then they eventually and when they fail to do this, many times the children grow up and turn away from Yehovah Elohim. Now, this is very sad, because the Bible says that the wages of sin is death. And if a child does not turn back to Yehovah Elohim, the end result is death. Now, sometimes children walk away from Elohim, but the Bible says, raise up a child in the way he shall go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. So sometimes, like the prodigal son in the parable, sometimes children, even though they are raised correctly, will walk away. But like the prodigal son, many times they come back. Despite your best efforts, you cannot always predict whether your children are going to remain faithful or not. but you do everything you can to raise them up and then encourage the young eagles. They have to leave the nest and fly on their own. And sometimes they make mistakes, and we are there to love them and to encourage them back, and hopefully they will come back. Now, we don't know the exact situation with the young man in Leviticus 24, but we do know that his mother was an Israelite and his father was an Egyptian. Now, right there, that raises some caution flags, if not red flags. Was the Egyptian, did he fall in love with the Israelite woman and marry her just because she was a beautiful woman and he fell in love with her? But he was not a convert to the God of Israel and to the Torah of Yehovah Elohim. And if that's the case, the woman was married unequally. She was unequally yoked. And maybe there was tension in the home where the father still, though he was married to an Israelite woman, he was still an Egyptian spiritually in his heart. And this may have raised a conflict or caused a conflict in the home where the woman might have been teaching one thing and the father was teaching something else. And the child was raised in a impossible situation, which led to his blaspheming Elohim. I don't know if that's what was going on. It's possible. It certainly raises concerns. When you marry outside the faith, you better make certain you are marrying somebody that's like Ruth, that said to Naomi, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Where you die, I will live. I will die. And so she turned from her Moabitess, pagan, Canaanite ways, and she followed Ruth back into the promised land. She was given grace and favor in the eyes of Boaz. They married. She was faithful, and she became one of the ancestors of Yeshua, of David, King David, and ultimately of Yeshua the Messiah. But we don't know what was going on in this house. Maybe the parents were both believers, but they didn't raise their children properly. Or in this case, their son. We don't know. But the results were bad. And this brings us to the next point. Was this child properly discipled? What caused him to blaspheme Elohim? I submit to you that he was not properly raised in the fear and the admonition of Yehovah Elohim, which is why he gave way to mocking and blaspheming Yehovah Elohim. Whether the Israelite woman was unequally yoked in marriage or had failed to raise her son properly, either way, this illustratively points to a problem in the modern Christian church, as the parents of the blasphemer failed to properly disciple their son, so the Christian church is failing to disciple its spiritual children in the word of Elohim. And you all know this because you've all been in these kind of churches. Every one of you listening to this video, or most of you. Does a serious disciple of our Messiah really think that an hour or two on Sunday morning with a dab of Sunday school tossed into the mix, plus a week's worth of vacation Bible school during the summer is sufficient to counter the onslaught of the secular spirit of Antichrist that continuously inundates our children 24/7 via the satanic educational system, entertainment, the media, popular culture, and the influences of their peers, not to mention the electronic devices that are feeding them a steady diet of ungodly filth day by day. Do we really think that the little dab of Christianity and almost no discipling they get in the church in their homes because the parents are too busy pursuing the almighty dollar or whatever, and they're not discipling their children every day. You really think that they're going to stand up and be able to stand against the tidal wave, the tsunami of that the enemy is pushing, throwing against them? If you do, I've got what? I've got the Brooklyn Bridge to sell you, okay? I've got swampland to sell you in the middle of the Sahara Desert, okay? Whatever. I believe that the church has failed to be spiritual light to those Yeshua instructed them to disciple as represented by the Menorah, and thus the church has lost many of her children to the influences of the world, the flesh and the devil because of it. How many saints, along with church leaders, spiritually abort their children because they failed to properly disciple or raise them in the word of Elohim, the Torah word of Elohim, the whole counsel of Yovel's word? Too many churches, to their shame, are more focused on making converts, filling their pews and their parking lots and offering plates to the enrichment of the clergy that are making true disciples of Yeshua the Messiah. Yeshua, in this great commission to the disciples, did not say, go ye therefore into the world and make converts. He did not say that. What did he say? He said, go ye therefore into the world, preach the gospel, and make disciples. Making a disciple is a process. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen 2 hours a week in church and Sunday school, and maybe Wednesday night Bible service, a prayer meeting, and a week during vacation Bible school in the summertime when your kids are young. To be sure, the church is spiritually aborting its own children because of its failure to assiduously follow Yeshua's Great Commission instructions to make disciples. Because of this, is it any wonder that the infanticidal abortion rates in America and the rest of the West are so high? We have failed to inculcate our children with the fear of Jehovah, the love of his word, and the Bible, and the high value that our Creator places on life. The natural result of this is high abortion rates, and the spiritual seeds of this horrific genocidal holocaust against our children, I believe, started in the Christian church. As the Christian church has diminished and gone down in its influence in society, starting in the 1960s, the abortion, in America at least, the abortion rates have gone up. As we can see, the example of the Menorah, the showbread, and the rebellious son of Leviticus 24 is a graphic, allegorical, and I believe a prophetic picture of the modern Christian church that fails to disciple its people. Again, a couple of hours a week in Sunday church is woefully inadequate amount of time to disciple and to inculcate a Christian with the means to resist the strong downward pulls of the world and the flesh and the devil, and they will face all week long as they go out into the world. They exit the doors of the Sunday church. If we fail to learn the lessons from the mistakes of those who have gone before us, then it is likely we will repeat the same mistakes again and again and again and suffer the same consequences as the young Israelite blasphemer in this chapter. It's time to lay the axe to the root of this tree where the Christian church is more intent on making converts than disciples, to promote its organizations, its kingdoms, the kingdom of men, and its wealth and its prestige, as it's heading pell-mell, headlong into apostasy. And the result is we're losing our young people, spiritually and literally, through abortion. Amen. And this concludes this message.